Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Enough to Keep Going podcast, episode number 336, April 28th, 2024. I'm your host, TomMaster99. Took a quick break last week, but I am back. With me tonight is Mr. DBQ Hams. DB, how are you?
Glad to have you back, Tao.
Thank you.
We hold down the fort just fine, but it's nice to have you here. So,
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. GameLogIQ. Game, how are you doing?
Hello.
Short and sweet. All right, let's jump into our main GX stories. And actually, GameLogIQ, we will start with you with a PC racing game.
Does it say on PC in the agenda? I mean,
Yes,
it does.
It does. Yeah.
Last week you were talking about setting up you had your wheel set up, but it was for, you had a wheel for both consoles. So
I've corrected it in the agenda. I have been playing this on Xbox.
Xbox racing game.
So I've been playing Assetto Corsa Competizione on Xbox. As DBQ mentioned last week, I talked about setting up my Thrustmaster TMX wheel and pedals, which I did, and proceeded to play the game. It's a good time. It's incredibly, I've talked about Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa Competizione before. Assetto Corsa tends to be just kind of broken on consoles. It has had since for time immemorial a weird save file bug where, like, when you go into settings and initially set it up, and mess with your tire pressure and your fuel out, all those type of things in the garage, it tends to not stick. On PC, there's some like kind of weird, goofy workarounds you can do to get it to take. On console, it just appears to be just completely broken, as far as I can tell. On PlayStation 5, I think you can kind of hop around, and PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, you can kind of hop around and get it working, but I have not been able to get it to work on Xbox. But the sequel, Assetto Corsa Competizione, does not appear to have that problem. So, got a few hours into the career mode. It's an incredibly challenging racer, as I've mentioned before. The EA F1 series, some of the Formula One teams do use that as like their simulator for training of their drivers. But the Assetto Corsa series is more widely used for simulation training, particularly in the GT car world circuit. So it's incredibly challenging, incredibly exacting. It really demands you to be super precise. There are no rewinds on this game, and so you could do a 20-minute race as I did, and make valid laps all the way around, and then spin the car out on the last lap, and you could choose to either take it or just start the entire session over. It is not fun. As I was talking about last week, I'd kind of just gotten started with the training mode, and that is a 10-minute session where, again, you can, run, I won't say perfect, but, relatively decent laps and then spin the car out, particularly as you start to get tire wear and the car gets lighter because it's burning fuel and things like that. So it models the GT world circuit, which is really one of the probably weirdest car circuits. It seems, I guess, normal to me, but it has different classes of cars, and so you have multiple classes of cars on the track at the same time. And so, yes, people are racing against each other, but they're not really racing against each other because you're really racing against the cars that are in the other class, but then you're also kind of racing, so it's really complicated and complex. But it's a great time. And again, playing with wheels and pedals just completely transformative for the game. It is a lesson in abject frustration when you're trying to play that thing with controller, but when you play it with the steering wheel, it's really pretty amazing. Doesn't have, because I'm not as thoroughly familiar with the GT car circuit as I am with, because I'm not as familiar with the GT car circuit in some incarnations as I am with Formula One. I'm getting a lot of tracks that I'm not necessarily accustomed to. Like the first one for the first championship is like the Grand Prix of Zonda or something that starts with a Z, and it's a track that I'm not familiar with. But the next track is Brands Hatch, back in the great warm welcome and wet UK. So it's very funny because I can see the track conditions are wet, as one would imagine. We'll have to see how it kind of goes. I haven't gotten that too deeply into Assetto Corsa Competizione. I have played it on PC, and I thought I had played a little further into it than I'm seeing now on Xbox, but maybe I play so many racing games I could definitely be getting them mixed up.
Nice. All right. And before we move on to DB here, unless DB, you have any questions or comments on Assetto Corsa?
No, I think I mean I know that you've talked about a set of Corsa games before. I don't know about Competizione. There we go. Got it there eventually. So I'm glad that
he said it because I wasn't about to say that.
That's right. I'm glad you had a chance to use your wheel and pedals as you were talking about last week. So, and interesting here. And who do we have? War was talking about it in the chat in terms of the campaign in this game as well.
Yeah, it's a little demanding. I mean, it penalizes you for not doing, which is, I guess, the type of thing that you would maybe expect, for a game like this. It penalizes you if you don't do every single session in a weekend, which is just highly unusual for a racing game, for a video game. Because, I mean, doing every single session means doing the practice sessions, both qualifying sessions. There are 2 race sessions per weekend. And again, that's what you're kind of accustomed to, but demanding that you go through the practice sessions is the one that's a little wonky. Usually you're allowed to skip those, but such is not the case here.
Nice. Thanks everybody for joining in the chat. Wara, Metroid, and Nelson's Gaming Culture. DB, you have a PS5 game.
I do, and since I already slaughtered the Assetto Corsa title, so I might as well just keep the theme going and mispronounce my next game here, which is Tales of Kenzera Zao. So this is the small studio EA Originals. I think Ascent Games is the studio. This was kind of headed by the actor who played Bayek in Assassin's Creed Origins. It's been on other, it does both voice acting and television acting as well. It's really wonderful. It's a Metroidvania. It feels very similar in terms of its movement to the most recent yes, the Prince of Persia game. There we go. Tron Gaming here, I would say, I don't know that it's one of those where he says in the chat, isn't it a ripoff of the most recent Prince of Persia game? I think the challenge here is that these games were in development, simultaneously, and that I think it is more of the fact that it's a Metroidvania. Yeah, Wara hits this as well, that it feels very Metroidvania-y, but it also is very fluid in its Metroidvania-y. It is, you switch between like a sun and a moon mask, which give you different types of attacks and movements and powers, and so that gives a little bit of variety there. I think the thing that really stands out, like the gameplay feels like a nice, side-scrolling 2D, 3D polygonal Metroidvania, but what really sets it apart from even the Prince of Persia game is kind of its heartfelt story, that it is dealing with death and loss, and the setup, this is not necessarily any spoilers here, and the setup here is you're playing a son whose father had just recently died, and he was a shaman and you're a shaman, and you're taking on his masks and going into the realm of the dead to bring him back to life, which one can only expect does not go the way that the main character thinks it should go. But there's some narrative beats, the way that they dole out some story memories and kind of personal memories. They're hidden kind of collectibles throughout the world, and so you get some voiceovers. Playing it on the PlayStation 5 has been a lot of fun as well, because as you find some of these memories, they're audio recordings and they'll play through the controller. so it gives just a little bit. It adds a little bit of texture to that in terms of the kind of not necessarily the spirituality, but more of the less of a corporal form, let's say, right? Like having it disconnected from the game, having it come through the controller feels a little more ghostly. But yeah, so I'm really enjoying it. I have not played Warren said he's played up to the Act 3 boss. I've only got through Act 1, so not a whole lot of time in it, but what I am is I'm really enjoying it. It also feels relatively small in terms of its scope, and maybe that is something that opens up in kind of a Metroidvania fashion once you get through the first, what you think are the first three type of things that you're trying to collect, and that there could be a wider story here. Laura mentions a bug here in the chat if you're watching on video. I don't know that I paid enough attention to that in terms of whether or not the question was about a directional bug where if you get out of the menu, it doesn't show up for a few seconds. I have not. I mean, that seems definitely something that could be patched out because it isn't. It's relatively small. So no, I don't know that I noticed it, but yeah, it is. If you like this type of game, right? Like at this point, there's enough Metroidvanias and they've all tried something a little bit different sometimes. And my tastes tend to land on the more fluid, quick moving Metroidvanias rather than kind of the Dark Souls like Metroidvanias in terms of the timed combat. If I'm moving through a giant map screen with multiple routes and backtracks, I like a good double jump and a dash and some quick movement here. So it's very fluid in that way. Tron Gaming talks about Super Metroid being, I think, right, this is the reason it's a pinnacle. I would put Castlevania Symphony of the Night there and the movement speed in there, but I think that there's been a lot of good ones of these over the course of the last few decades. One of the ones that stood out to me in the past couple of years that doesn't see a lot of action is Imp of the Sun, small little Metroidvania-y, another indie developer, Brazilian game. So there's plenty of these out here. The nice thing about this is it really does have kind of a double A type of a feel to it, and it looks great. And I think I will also say that maybe it's resonating with me because I have lost my father. It's been 15 years or so, but so I can emotionally kind of connect with a character wrestling with some of these pieces as well. And so that's where I think this is done well in terms of the narrative aspect, at least from what I've seen so far. And from what I've read online, it certainly feels like it resonated with other people.
So DBQ, you went for this, but chose to bypass Prince of Persia. Any reasoning behind that?
Two reasons behind it. One, I have PlayStation Plus Platinum or whatever the top tier is, and so it was free on PlayStation. So day one launch, and so that made it really easy. Also, as we talked about last week, I am a sucker for waiting on my Ubisoft games until they hit the kind of $20-$25 threshold. So Prince of Persia is right now kind of lands around the $30 range. Once it hits 20, it's definitely going to be something I want to pick up because I enjoy that type of gameplay. You played Prince of Persia, GameLogIQ. In terms of its movement, and I played the demo of Prince of Persia as well, I feel like the movement there was pretty fluid as well. Is there anything in this that I'm describing that sounds any different in terms of, you get a couple different mechanics, I'm sure, in terms of some of the different attacks and powers?
From what I'd seen, and we should definitely make sure that we understand that I am no Metroidvania expert. It is incredibly rare for me to get that out of my seat to go attach myself to a Metroidvania. I feel like from what I've seen from Zao, I feel like Zao across the spectrum, really in first-person shooters, we've had the discussion on this show about how, heaviness of movement and kind of visceralness versus versus fluidity, right? And speed. And the problem you have with shooters is when things tend to get fast, you tend to lose a lot of that impactfulness that you feel from like melee hits. And we've talked about the range of the spectrum of where I feel like Destiny 2 gets it like really right. And then you have Call of Duty, which is kind of lightweight, faster, not problematic, unless you get to something like Vanguard, which felt just so super lightweight, it was cartoony. But then you have, normal Call of Duty, and then, to the far left, you have Halo, which in Halo Infinite improves on that formula. It makes it a little less kind of clunky feeling in comparison to like old style Halo. But with Metroidvanias, we kind of have that spectrum too. And from what I saw of Zao, again, having not played it, Zao seemed to be a little more lightweight in the direction of Ori. Whereas I feel like Prince of Persia has a little more weightiness to it and a little more impactful. And quite frankly, I was surprised in Prince of Persia that there's plenty of platforming There's plenty of platforming in Prince of Persia, but I feel like there was way more combat than I expected in Prince of Persia, because of course I'm familiar with like the legacy of Prince of Persia, and I'm not talking about what the kids today think is the legacy of Prince of Persia, right? In the 3D era of PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, I'm talking about way old school, MS DOS Prince of Persia.
You're taking Jordan Mechner's Prince of Persia, and yep.
Yeah, but in addition to the additional combat, I feel like Prince of Persia felt heavier. Like the character had like muscle to them in a way that I don't necessarily feel like with Ori, and Zao seems to lean more in the direction of Ori. But still, I would say in between Ori and what I know of Prince of Persia, of the Lost Crown.
Yeah, I feel that that's probably accurate from just my little time with the demo as well, is that there is definitely a lighterness to Zao. But it also fits nicely with the character and the world that you're moving in. So it makes the action pretty quick, and it's at least, at this stage, there's a lot of traversal, and that movement helps in the traversal pieces.
Nice. Yeah, I think the last Metroidvania I played was the 2014 Strider, which was on the Xbox.
Yeah. Yep.
I think it came out 360, but I played on the Xbox One, the original Xbox One, and I beat it eventually, but kind of like Metroid or Metal Gear Solid back on PS1, it kind of killed it for me for the rest of Metroidvania, just because it's, just back and forth on the stuff. It just kind of gets to me sometimes. So, but it, it was a good game, but it just, I just didn't like all the kind of going back over the same area, that kind of over and over. But it looks very pretty though, this game, the Tales of Kenzera.
You make me chuckle because you're going back over the same area again and again in how many of your survival games that you're playing, right? You're living in that same world. Yeah. I think the reason that Metroidvanias have always kind of worked for me is that there is a sense of progression, that even if you are backtracking, like it rewards immersion because you're paying attention to those things. And as the genre has evolved, the map has been really good. And I think Prince of Persia does this well with the map in terms of calling out different spots that you might not have been able to hit before, or being able to place pins so that you know where to come back to. I think that's one of the challenges in a Metroidvania, is a good map system that helps in that navigation if you're not playing it constantly.
Yeah, I think the other thing with Strider too is always kind of like indoor, like not factories, but kind of look like industrial type places. So kind of like they were saying before in the chat, it was kind of samey. So everything looked the same. It's pretty much like just corridors. So I don't know if there's a lot of variation in the environments here.
Yeah, I would say if Strider is your last Metroidvania kind of taste, there's been a whole lot of other examples of this that aren't necessarily in the indie pixelated 2D space, that both Prince of Persia and Zao really are brighter, prettier looking games that have a little more variety of environments as well.
Nice.
So
go ahead.
So DBQ, I guess just a couple more questions. So obviously, a principal reason why I'm not a super huge fan of Metroidvanias is because at their root they are platformers, and I do not like platformers. I particularly did not like super frustrating platformers that require pinpoint precision and like get bent out of shape if you like do your jump like one half step early or too late. What is that precision requirement with Zhao?
So at this point, Zhao doesn't feel that pinpointy. There's definitely some forgiveness in the movement. It doesn't also feel like if you're missing a jump, you're only going a few, you're dropping a level and have to come back up. It doesn't feel like it's that punishing, that demanding of a platformer. I'm sure there are going to be spots where it pushes that or collectibles that kind of challenge you to get to a certain spot. And I've already seen a few of those, but it doesn't, in terms of the spectrum of Metroidvanias, right? Like it is definitely not in the Hollow Knight kind of spectrum of really pushing you in terms of both combat and platforming, which I think in some ways makes it more accessible. And if part of what it's trying to do is tell you this story, that having gameplay that is relatively accessible and not a really high barrier of challenge means that it allows people to experience more of that story before they might hit a kind of a threshold of a pain point.
Okay, and I am already looking it up now, but I was curious. So Tales of Kenzera Zhao is on PlayStation. What is it called? PlayStation Plus Premium, but it is not on Game Pass.
Correct. It's not on Game Pass. I mean, it's out on all 4 platforms, but it is only part of a subscription package within the PlayStation 1. So it must have been a EA agreement.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Tal. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. Is that a EA? What do they call it? EA Originals?
EA Originals. Yep.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. All right. And for my speaking of samey, as I was going to say, Fortnite is my game of choice here for the main GX stories, but not for Battle Royale or Lego Rocket Racing. Not even the festival, which actually just got Rock Band 4 guitar support.
Yep, and the new PDP Riffmaster support as well.
Yep. And the new guitar that's out there, which actually looks pretty cool. I might pick one of those up eventually. But I actually went
sold
back.
Out if you're looking. As somebody who has spent the week trying to hunt one down, yeah, they are sold out.
Well, that's good. At least that's they're selling for. Well, I guess it makes sense just because that you really need guitars for that, or some kind of instrument for those for that mode at least. Keyboard and controller is a little rough sometimes, at least for me. But no, I went and played, of all things, Save the World, the original game that actually came out for Fortnite, or the original game. And actually, I played this once again. I think I've mentioned this before a lot of times. My son kind of pulls me into things. He started playing it over the last couple weeks, and he pulled me in. He wanted to have me try it and play with him. So I was like, I'll get it, because I think I bought one of the skins one time, and it actually came with Save the World, so it was like super cheap. I think it was only like $10 or something that came with the skin. It was a skin for the BR for the Battle Royale, but it was a Save the World skin. So I got Save the World. So I've had it for like a year maybe or so, probably longer. Finally jumped back into it. So this is kind of like their kind of horde mode, where you're kind of like there's different missions that you do, and you kind of have to protect like a satellite or protect a certain area within a map or something like that. And I thought that's like all it was, and it kind of is as far as gameplay. But then there's this whole other layer with in kind of like the Battle Royale, where you have the different rarities of the different weapons, and also traps in Save the World. Not so much in the BR, but there's different traps with the different rarities also. So it's kind of like a almost like a looter shooter, kind of like you're going in trying to get all this different rarity weapons, and you have your grays and greens and blues, purples, and up to legendary. So you kind of working to get all these better weapons, so you can level up and do these more difficult missions and difficult levels and stuff. So I think when you're doing each mission, at least certain ones, you can actually set the difficulty. I've only played with that a little bit. Most of the time he's hosting, so he's kind of in control of everything. So I haven't really done it too much myself. But it's just kind of a nice change of pace to go in and do that. It's like I said, the gameplay itself is like you're just protecting areas, and it's as the zombies come in. So it's kind of kind of samey as we're talking about with samey gameplay, but it's just kind of cool that all the different weapons you can get and stuff like that, different kind of traps. Like I'm watching videos and people are build these elaborate like kind of like tunnel systems and then they put traps within them, so it's kind of a different way other than other than just like walling up everything and just waiting for the zombies or creatures, whatever they are, to break him down. You can kind of take him out before that, so it's kind of cool. But I'm having a good time with it so far. And also, kind of on the plus side, you can get V-Bucks from this, which I did not realize. Not like a huge lot, but like 100, I think is the couple times that I've gotten some. As after each round, you get like a treasure chest, and depending on how you do, it's a higher tier treasure chest. So sometimes you'll get V-Bucks out of it, so it's kind of nice too. It's a different way to earn that stuff, but. Just running through that mode right now and chugging along. It's kind of, as I was playing, I was like, oh man, it kind of stinks now that they've kind of dropped support. Well, at least support as far as like updating for new content and stuff like that. They still update for like bugs and stuff, but and they'll still have, I guess my son was saying, they'll still have like seasonal stuff, but it's nothing. I think it's kind of just repeating seasonal stuff they've done in the past, so it's nothing new. But I just thought it was kind of stinks that they don't support it anymore. But they have all these other modes and all this other stuff, and maybe if it gets popular again, they might jump back into it. So that's always a possibility. But having a good time, so probably play more of that in the coming future.
So I know DBQ tried to throw some shade at you about rerunning areas in yours. I would contend though that there's a stark difference between like traversing a biodome, right? Within an open world environment multiple times versus rerunning a level. Like I think we've all come through it's an extreme nope of mine. Like if you make me go down a level to achieve an objective and then tell me to run the level backwards, right, as a means to exit the level, that's particularly irksome and bothersome. And I think that's what Tao I felt was evoking more so when he talked about Strider.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, for the sake of argument, I was trying to find a through line here, but as someone who's run hundreds of Destiny strikes, right, like, I'm perfectly fine running the same content if you are getting different experiences. And that is, a horde mode can do that. And I think actually part of what I love about Tao at your conversation is the different experience comes from playing with your son as well, right? And experiencing that with him and allowing him, as you said, like to take the lead. And there's a different level of engagement and enjoyment. At least there always has been for me when I get to sit down and play with my kids. So I'm glad that, regardless of the age of the game, that it is giving it some new life when you get to play with family members.
Yeah, I think it's a good byproduct too of having children. Like, yeah, you can show them, like I've showed him like obviously old Super Mario Brother game, all SNES and Genesis games and stuff. But he'll pull me into stuff I might not have ever even tried and stuff like that. So like Descenders back in the day, like I probably would have played that unless it was because of him, because he wanted to play with me, and all these other games. So Roblox and stuff like that. So it's kind of nice. Just we kind of have that back and forth where we can show games to each other. So it's kind of nice. All right, so let's jump into the main news headlines. Mr. GameLogic, you have some Xbox releases coming up, and I'm assuming these are not just Game Pass or even Game Pass games, right? These are just full releases on the.
No, these are Game Pass games, I believe.
Oh, are they Game Pass games?
I don't know if they're Game Pass games or not. They just popped out at me because I saw them up in the new release list on Newswire. And they're just quick notes. They're not really a news story, but they jumped out at me as something to make sure people were aware of. So, and I figured this first one DBQ is probably more familiar with than I am. But the Front Mission games, and I didn't get a chance to look this up, have any of them come? Prior to this wave of like remakes, have any of the Front Mission games come to the U.S. before? Or have they all been locked in Japan?
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly don't know.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look. I know Front Mission 2, as far as I understand, had been locked in Japan, and so remakes recently made their way to Nintendo Switch, and then more recently to PlayStation 5. Now they are arriving on Xbox, so that game is out this week. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of I guess it's kind of a tactical RPG, turn-based, but it focuses on mech combat. But then you have the ability to, again, it's an older game, so don't think this is like Baldur's Gate 3. But you do have the ability to then pick and choose and level up skills and whatnot for people. I have it on Nintendo Switch and played it for a little while. Super interesting, really loved it. Eventually we'll get back to it. And then for racing fans, MotoGP 24 is out this week as well.
And I do stand corrected. These are not Game Pass games. These are full-on releases.
Yeah, and there's other games coming out, but these are just two that kind of popped up at me as like significant ones that Xbox fans might want to keep an eye out for. First news story in the rundown. First actual news story. Microsoft meeting players where they are as Xbox games among PlayStation Store's best sellers. This news story over on Push Square by Stephen Talby. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has passed comment about Xbox's increased presence on other platforms. Speaking during an earnings call, he said how titles under the Xbox umbrella have been selling rather well on PlayStation Store. Earlier this month, we had 7 games among the top 25 on the PlayStation Store, more than any other publisher, Nadella said. As VGC points out, it seems he may be referring to a recent report from TweetTown, which outlines the 25 best-selling games on Sony's digital storefront as of 18 April, at least. When you include titles published by Xbox Game Studios, Bethesda, and Activision, all now owned by Microsoft, and of course the data showed that it had even more games in the top 25 than Sony, with 7 games to 5. So trying to decide where to start. Let's start with the discussion of earnings. At DBQ, if you've pulled the information, we're welcome to go through them. I found the overall earnings discussion to be not super interesting.
Yeah, not that surprising, right? I think it was easy to pull some headlines when you're talking about console sales being down, but it's also not outside of the trends that were going on. So no, nothing necessarily nothing necessarily surprising there. And the fact that this is the first time we're kind of aggregating in Activision into those numbers.
Yeah, and go back to the Front Mission story. Yeah, Lord Mission, that's the way I remember it too. I think Front Mission, the first one was in the U.S., but Front Mission 2, like I said, has been locked in Japan. And yes, I think the first one was on a Nintendo system. But with regards to the earnings call, the reason I didn't put an earnings call story in here and us do the full rundown and breakdown like we normally do is the market kind of is what it is. And I think maybe as I've grown incredibly frustrated by the conversation around the video game industry and market at the beginning of this year, because I would say greater than 50% of the discussion that I see is stuff that's made up. It's not even industry news. It's this discussion of a bunch of things that a bunch of people think is happening that they're trying to make stories about. And I'm like, this isn't really what's happening. You've made it up, and it's the whole discussion point. In the meantime, people get confused very frequently when I talk to them about, this event happened or this event happened, and we've seen this happen before. And they're like, where did that happen? Where did it get written? I'm like, well, if you would stop paying attention to all the things that people make up and actually pay attention to the industry news, you would probably catch some of this stuff. The market right now, the industry right now is what it is. PlayStation and Nintendo have effectively taken the high-end console customer, and PlayStation has that, and Nintendo has focused on the low-end console customer, and they have that. And Xbox has kind of this weird slice in between, kind of all over the place, and that's that. I mean, and unless there's some like cataclysmic news story that says that segmentation and stratification of the market gets upended, there's really nothing more to talk about. And when you look at these companies, Xbox is really kind of the IBM of the gaming industry. They are a software and services company. PlayStation is the Apple of the gaming industry. They are an ecosystem company that is heavily oriented around the notion of, you buy our hardware, then we want you to stay in our ecosystem. And Nintendo, I can't remember if I've come up with an analogy for them, but they're essentially...
I was curious what you were going to use for the Nintendo now, because I could see the other ones, right? Because I was even thinking with this report of Microsoft games being top sellers on PlayStation, like Yeah, Microsoft Word works great on my MacBook, right? Like this is not a surprise, nor it should be if this is the direction that Xbox and Microsoft continue to go in.
Yeah, actually, I had come up with an analogy for Nintendo. It doesn't particularly come off the tongue very well, but in my mind, they are, from a hardware perspective, they're kind of like the Vizio and TCL, right? But the weird thing, but they make Disney-like content, right? So they make like this kind of high-end content, or at least that is of a very particular taste and pointed at a very particular demographic, and then they combine that with budget hardware that, you know, doesn't cost a lot. If you compare it against like a high-end television, you don't come up right. But nobody necessarily really walks into somebody's living room and says, you have a Vizio, right? Like usually that just means that's a person who made like a decent purchase and got what they needed and didn't buy a lot of bells and whistles that they didn't think that they needed. So
I think that's actually a really good comparison, right? The number of, as Lord Metroid says in the chat, right? The number of units that the Switch has sold, right? This is a mass market. It's a price point to move units. Yeah. Which is where Vizio and, you know, some of those land.
Right. So that's just kind of where the market is. And like I said, I you know, there's obviously all the console warring, and that I don't even want to be bothered with, but it's really this whole notion that, you know, like I said, people like every week, like somebody has a new made up theory about like what's going on. And I can take every single data point that I've seen presented this year and I can map it against the past 50-year history of the gaming industry, which I have done. And I've tried to point that out to people, but nobody pays attention. And I could say everything that you're talking about has occurred before, and it hasn't resulted in the outcomes and things that you're talking about now. And maybe it will, but what you can't do is you can't say that those theories are based on historical data or representation of things that we've seen before. And so if somehow, some way, in some wackadoodle, you know, Kang the Conqueror way of the universe, the outcome this time is going to be radically different than it was like the 3-5 times before that it happened. Okay. But like I said, I don't think we can have a conversation that, you know, this is history repeating itself. And that's why, like, the earnings call came out, obviously big deal. Microsoft, billions of dollars of profit, cloud leads the way, AI, MPU, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, whatever. None of this stuff is interesting. But this notion that, Microsoft is meeting customers, you know, where they are, is a thing that we've heard from Satya Nadella before. And for those of us who bear the scars of Windows Phone, like literally verbatim, those were his words. Those were his exact words when we did the Windows Phone thing. It's, I want my software to be where the customers are. And if the customers are on PlayStation and Nintendo, then that's where he wants his software. I'm not going to, you know, extrapolate into this means that, you know, they're going to put more games or whatever on there. I mean, it'll be whatever it is. Should that matter to an Xbox fan? I don't know. I mean, does the fact that Microsoft Office is on the Mac make Microsoft Office on Windows any worse? No. So businesses are going to do what businesses are going to do. What I think will probably happen, because we've seen this happen before. This is literally the textbook case study of what happened with Windows Phone when Satya said these things. I would expect more Xbox titles to go to more platforms because it only makes sense. And if the only positive thing that he had to say about the gaming division was that their games are really performing well on PlayStation, then that's probably an indication that he at least has some interest in more Xbox games going to platforms where there are more customers, because that's exactly what he said before. I also mentioned this week, when Microsoft made the Nokia acquisition, there were a set of things that didn't happen. Acquiring Nokia didn't increase their market share of mobile phones. It did not incentivize developers to make more apps for Windows Phone. And it did not improve their relationships with carriers. And if those things happen or are happening in the wake of their purchase of Activision, then I would expect the same behavior that I saw from Windows Phone, which is there will be an increased focus on software going to other platforms where more people can buy them, because that will mean more money. But at the end of the day, what I will say, the difference that I hope and believe is going to happen is that When that happened with Windows Phone, we were all orphaned and abandoned, right? Microsoft sold Nokia. They completely eradicated the Windows Phone operating system. There was no, I mean, the Surface Duo came around. It was probably the closest thing to the old Courier concept, but they've abandoned that as well. I expect gaming to go the route of Microsoft Surface and for it to continue to be like for it to become more of a boutique play for a very small addressable market. And I think that's fine. This thing of being in the top 7 of the PlayStation Store, I'm going to throw a flag on that play. Like you can pick any day of the week and find yourself in the top of the PlayStation Store because it changes and it fluctuates every single day. It doesn't really mean anything. Often, across all the console stores, you can see that, and then you see sales numbers, and they don't like. So, to me, the only thing that really matters is when we see sales numbers. NPDs aren't out for the month of March yet, and when they are out, they come out on the 1st of May. That's when we'll really get an opportunity to see, how sales are going on PlayStation, and we will get. And Matt Piscatella puts out the numbers about player engagement now per platform, and that will also give us a chance to see if those games are in the top, and then that'll matter.
Let's jump to the next news story. This one is all the E3 replacements that are happening this summer. We got another one now. Of course, we have Summer Game Fest, which is set for June 7th. This is followed by Play Days Media Showcase, organized by I Am 8-Bit on June 8th. 8th through the 10th, excuse me. Ubisoft's Forward event is also on June 10th. Day of the Devs on June 7th, excuse me. Future Game Show June 8th, PC Gaming Show June 9th, and Microsoft obviously has theirs. Was it the 12th? Or I can't remember. I was going to look that up and I forgot. I think they've already they set their date. I can't remember what it is. But now we also have IGN Live as a live consumer show, which is set to take place on June 7th and the 9th. So this event will have hands-on games plus multimedia stages featuring interviews, panels, live podcasts, and more. Companies set to attend are Amazon, Atari, Netflix, and Square Enix, however you want to say it. So, gentlemen, we got another show, potentially, I guess. Although this one might be just more of maybe kind of showcasing what's being shown in the other showcases. They might. I mean, I'm assuming they'll probably have some stuff also new to show. But any comments on this new showcase that's coming up here?
So IGN has had their Summer of Game showcase in the past, right? Like it's usually kind of gone right along with Jeff Keighley's Summer of Games, whatever banner it has. Yeah. I mean, I think that this it is likely. I mean, I would anticipate that this is a good spot for mid-tier and smaller developers to get things out in front of people. That this is not the place where we see big marquee games. That anything that has the ability to have a big marquee game, the marketing spend is better directed at an individual direct kind of video presentation. Without kind of bundling it into something else, because it can grab headlines no matter when they spin it out. I think we've seen that plenty of times, that the benefit of these kind of cumulative spaces is that it can bring some smaller things up that may not always see the light. At least that's my hope. And I could be wrong in terms of it. Maybe since it's IGN, it does pull a little bit more weight, but I also don't know that there is a need for that weight to be pulled in that way.
So we've seen them do it before, but I mean, it's been particularly different, right? And I thought that their setup has been that they've been out and around Summer Game Fest. They've been, in a nearby building or in the area or whatever. They have, done their whole war room of covering the event. And then on the backside of that, then they have had, and then in the evenings they've had meetups and stuff at different bars, and then sometimes on the back end of that they've had like a gathering back at their own office buildings, or like a paid event, like a big party. But part of that party has just been them doing like Game Scoop Live, from a sound stage, and and they've brought out some of the podcasts or whatever and had them, do like a mini show or whatever. But this is them. It's like a paid event for like several days. They've got stuff on their own stage. They've got people coming through. So I feel like it's a little different than what they've done before. But I do agree with you that like I don't think it's going to be big splashes. I think I was listening to Podcast Unlocked, so I heard Ryan McCaffrey talk about this, and they mentioned that like what they're really trying to do is they're really trying to do the half of what E3 was trying to get to that they never really got, which is E3 had historically been an industry show. And then in the waning years, and part of the things that I think kind of in some ways led to their demise, is they tried to convert it to a consumer event. And they torqued off a lot of the media who had previously had the event kind of to themselves. I guess the public had always been allowed in like the last day or something like that. But by then, like the media were gone. But then over the years, then they tried to split it in half, and then they tried to make them all there at the same time. But what McCaffrey was talking about was that what IGN is really trying to do is really trying to do a consumer-facing event. Like this is not an industry show. It's really to put games in front of the consumer, and it's really to have a lot of events that are very community-oriented. So it'll be interesting, to see how it comes out.
Yeah, kind of like a mini E3 maybe, or a PAX or something. Just something to show off games and stuff.
Yeah, I'd say more like a PAX.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into the next news story here. Steam closes an early access loophole in its refund policy. So initially, obviously, if you're on Steam, you probably know. Well, you may know that there's a return policy where as long as you've played something, I think it's within. You haven't played for more than 2 hours.
2 hours.
Within 14 days.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Within about 2 weeks, you're able to refund the game, and get your full refund back. Excuse me, on your money. So, but if there's anything in early access or advanced access, so obviously early access is, a game that's put out there. It's not complete. It changes all the time. Obviously, I think we've all talked about it. Probably me more than anything. People play it. They get feedback. The developers get feedback, and then eventually they'll release the whole thing, which is one I'll talk about later, actually. And then advanced access is playing a full version of a game before its proper debut. So, a lot of times these developers nowadays, they'll have some kind of like bundle, deluxe bundle, ultimate bundle, and you get to play it 3, 4, 5 days maybe early. So that's the advanced access. So during those 2 periods, you're able to. So if you played the game, you're actually able to beat it. You're still able to refund it and get your money back because it was an early access and advanced access. Now they've closed that, and they've said basically if it's only a beta testing, which I mean who knows, in the future that might change too. Any other time though, even if it's early access or advanced access, you can't get a refund after those 2 hours or 14 days. So, which I never even knew there was that loophole in there, which was kind of surprising, I guess, because I could see maybe for early access that they would let that slide, but the advanced access thing would kind of surprised me, I guess, because I mean it is the full game that you're getting at that point. But now they've totally said, hey, unless it's a beta testing that you're doing, you have to, if you go past that 2 hours, you can't get your refund anymore. But I just thought that was kind of interesting and just kind of weird too, I guess, in my eyes. But any comments on that story?
Yeah, it feels like it's a response to what the current marketplace is, where there's a lot more volume coming out in early access, staying in early access longer.
Yes,
that early
definitely.
access is not the same that it was when this policy was put into place. And so being able to respond to it seems pretty reasonable, considering things can be in early access for years and people can invest hundreds of hours in it.
Yeah, and it's couple pretty big games. Well, one game they mentioned here is Hades, and I guess they're doing the same thing with Hades 2, or it's going to release in early access. But another one was Baldur's Gate 3, which is kind of comes to mind when I was kind of reading this. I was like, because that was like a year, I think, in early access or so, maybe a little bit longer before it was officially released. So that's when they could have done that trick on. But GameLogIQ, anything on there?
I mean, so there's not a ton of things. I tend to not throw the term anti-consumer around. I tend to, just the market is what the market is. You buy a thing or you not buy a thing. I don't get, I know there were some comments in the chat, and I'm not picking on you guys. I'm just pulling these in as examples of things that like normally don't bother me. There were comments, a discussion about like the price of Prince of Persia, the price of Ubisoft, like that. I think we had a discussion last week about something, typically, if I like a thing, I go get it. And if I don't like a thing, I don't. I have long held that, in particular, and another thing, like I'm not hardcore in the direction of, digital games, they don't pay for packaging and shipping and printing a disc, so we should be getting them for less. Like, I get it, but like, I don't personally, that doesn't bother me, and I don't personally think that way. But I have long held that the one thing that I feel that is broken, in particular in the United States, is the draconian regime of the approach to digital games and refunds. Like, it is ridiculous. Like, if you buy a PlayStation game, if you download it, they don't owe you a refund. Like, that's like, you haven't even started the game. Like, that's ridiculous. And I think we mentioned, we've talked here about how I was bitten a few years ago by like NBA 2K like 18 or something like that, which was just completely a broken mess and unplayable. But because I, in my due diligence, feel like it's necessary for me to prove that something's broken right before I ask for a refund, I spent more than two hours. I also found out at that time that 2 hours because I was live streaming it, 2 hours sitting idly in the menu counts. So whether you would think that they have telemetry to tell them if you were actively playing the game, but they don't apply that. It's just if the game was booted up, right, and that executable was in runtime for 2 hours, they count that against you. If you look around globally at other economic systems and nations, they have much more consumer-leaning retribution processes for problems with video games and digital video games. And like we need some of that. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous in my mind, and absolutely too leaning in the direction of the corporation. And Steam is the worst. And like, I think, after that NBA 2K thing, I spent like a year where I refused to buy a Steam game. And I eventually went back, but I eventually went back when the Epic Game Store came online, and now my approach is I have a metric for like how many of my games I procure from Steam as a supplier versus Epic Games as a supplier versus GOG as a supplier, so that if I ever decide to go scorched earth, with Steam, my entire library isn't over there. So this to me is just another example of them tightening down right on the draconian regime that is in a direction that I feel isn't favorable towards the consumer. But Gabe is going to do what Gabe is going to do.
Gabe is law. All right, let's jump in. GameLogIQ, actually, you got the next couple if you want to round out the news story. The first one is Qualcomm story.
Yeah, Qualcomm is making 5nm ARM chipsets for Windows laptops. This news story over on Engadget. The company also announced a new line of chips for handheld gaming devices. This news story by Chris Holt. Qualcomm is expanding its lineup of ARM-based chips for Windows and Chromebooks with Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3 and 7-Chuck Plus Gen 3 platforms. In addition, the company aims to power handheld gaming devices using Snapdragon G3X Gen 1 chipsets. Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3. Look, I usually accuse Microsoft of having a really bad problem with like naming conventions, but this is ridiculous, Qualcomm. You guys need a consultant to clean this up. You guys have been making chips for a long time. I get it. If you're trying to come up with new names for Snapdragons, I understand. But man, this needs to be streamlined. Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3, which builds on last year's Gen 2, is the first 5nm PC platform, according to Qualcomm, which designed it with ultra slim and fanless laptops in mind. Trying to see down here where Qualcomm says 8CX Gen 3 will offer up to 60% improved performance over previous generation chips during GPU-intensive tasks thanks to the Adreno GPU. You'll be able to play games in full HD at up to 120 frames per second, and Qualcomm claims the platform is optimized to let folks play up to 50% longer certain competing platforms. So the reason I pulled this story is number one. One of the things that hasn't been realized, because like whenever Apple does something, it becomes this big hoopla fanfare. Obviously, Apple rolled out the iPhone 15, and there was lots of there was lots of cheerleading about the fact that the chip in the iPhone 15 is capable of doing ray tracing. The Adreno GPU, which is in the Snapdragon, which is part of the Snapdragon platform, has been doing ray tracing since 2022. Now, granted, capabilities roll out all the time. Whether or not they are impactful and whether or not anything is done with them on the market, that often takes time. But Adreno GPUs have been capable of ray tracing for a while. I mentioned this on Gaming Circle podcast yesterday, and I think a lot of people thought I was talking about a comparison between ARM and x86 CPUs running on the Windows platform. What I was mentioning was that FSR, AMD's frame rate acceleration technology, is not, mistakenly by a lot of people that's thought of as being solely an AMD technology, is actually a cohort between AMD, Samsung, and Qualcomm, who participate in development of FSR. And so my point is that with Qualcomm having to make the investment to go in this direction, with them getting support and obviously some agreement and some strategic indication from Microsoft that this is important to them. And again, this is not Qualcomm's first time out of the pool. I saw a lot of kind of cheerleading about these chips rolling out. I'm like, guys, these are the third or fourth attempts by Qualcomm to make Windows on ARM a thing. So let's pump the brakes on that a little bit. But it seems, I've listened to Paul Thurrott. I've listened to him for 2 decades. He's a senior journalist who has followed Windows as long as I have followed Windows, and has access to much greater inside information. And Thurrott, who went to the journalist invited demo for these chips 2 weeks ago, having had the experience of used, the previous iteration, says that these things are formidable machines that seem to finally be getting the job done. And they're not doing that just by themselves. Microsoft has also made work as well. But what's super interesting to me is obviously the intention to use these low-power chips in handhelds, which may, right now today, handhelds are powered by AMD APUs, which is a combination of CPU and GPU on one chip, on one chip, and then in a couple rare cases, like with the MSI Claw, some of them are using Intel chips. I think Yayo has also made one with an Intel chip. So this is another vendor coming into the space, and this is my point. And they're a vendor who can provide these chips at volume. I don't necessarily know that AMD and Intel's foundry pipelines, given the way their businesses are oriented, they're not going to be able to provide like tons of chips for this effort, particularly when the demand isn't there. But Qualcomm is going to be churning these things out to be utilized in plenty of platforms, and their foundry and their pipelines and their supply lines are rigged, I think, to produce these at greater volume at much less expense. So it'll be interesting as we see the first handhelds come up with these. And now, because of Windows compatibility, you're going to have the potential to make a device that runs on a Qualcomm chip that runs on Windows. And again, despite their claims, right, will be in a form factor where people don't necessarily have the expectation for it to run at 4K 60, and they can provide it at a lower resolution, running at 40 frames per second, and that thereby being compatible with the Steam Deck, in the ROG Ally and other things, kind of in that competitive band. So I think it speaks well of expectations we can have of seeing additional gaming handhelds, potentially powered by this chip package, over the next few years.
They mentioned in the article too that they collaborated with Razer on a dev kit, portable handheld gaming dev kit, basically. With Razer, Razer already has like a portable machine, correct? Am I wrong?
So so Razer has. So Razer did the Razer phone and the Razer phone 2. They have a portable device, which I think named the Razer Edge, which I've looked at. And I'm like, guys, this is just the Razer Phone 3. But I mean, it's the Razer Phone 3 with like a Kishi like controller like that comes with it. It's on Verizon. You have to have a wireless plan to go along with it. As far as I can tell, it's not selling particularly well. But it's also an Android device, and so it plays Android games, and it can, it can play stuff through the cloud, but it can only run Android games on Metal. So yeah, the fact that they've worked with Razer, Razer has gained. So Razer is one. I think they are the leading manufacturer by revenue of gaming peripherals, but like I don't want to say it. We should hope that Razer doesn't speak for the gaming market in terms of being a consultant to Qualcomm or other vendors trying to come into the space. I think Razer has insight into a customer that is very, what do I want to say? In a lot of cases, Razer is the default choice, right? So people know Razer. When somebody wants a headset, they go after a Razer, right? Because they don't know anything else. But in a lot of cases, Razer may not be like the best choice. And where their software is concerned and some of their integrations that I see, I don't feel like they're necessarily the best thing on the market. So them working with Razer like doesn't give me a lot of hopes. I hope that they start hearing from some other people as well that they can work alongside.
All right. You want to close us out here on the new segment with Resident Evil creator news, or former Resident Evil creator move, I should say.
Sure. DBQ, did you have anything on that article? Okay. Okay. Last story. Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami left Tango Gameworks. To break free from survival horror. The story over on Eurogamer by Ed Nightingale. Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami has opened up about his decision to leave Tango Gameworks as he wishes to break free from the survival horror genre. Mikami left Tango Gameworks, ZeniMax's own studio he founded in 2010 in February last year. Then earlier this year, he founded a new company called, I think it's called Kimoy. And basically what he talks about in this article is that, he really wanted to get back to different types of content. I think one of the major thing that jumped out at me in this article and some other literature that I've read about his break is that basically what it sounds like to me is that he had expectations of how much creative freedom and latitude he was going to have being part of the larger Bethesda conglomerate. And I think what he found over time is that is not the creative freedom and latitude that he had. And I suspect that then got even worse, under Xbox. And not because it's Xbox, but just because as you join a larger organization and you get pushed further down, you become less relevant, you have less of a voice. What he talks about is, how a lot of people look to him as if, he had like this great insight and this great say into kind of what they were doing strategically. And he says, I'm not sure if it's in this article or another article, he's like, I was just like another rank and file employee. I mean, and when you've been a CEO and you've been running your own show, and then and now admittedly he's the one who made the decision, right, to sell to Bethesda. But clearly, he was not getting what he wanted out of the deal. And then obviously when you're part of Bethesda and then Bethesda decides to sell to Xbox and you had no say in that either. And then you had no say in right direction that came from that in terms of, ratcheting your studio vectored, to be vectored in a direction to support Game Pass and other things like that. You could see why he might want to make his exit. Any comments on this one from you guys?
No, DB.
No, I think it'll be interesting to see where he goes and what that looks like. So, yeah, I mean, not where he goes, but what he does once he's there, right? We know where he is. What's he working on?
Since he doesn't want to do survival hero anymore, or horror, excuse me. So see what he comes up with. Interesting. All right, gentlemen, let's jump into our last segment for our round robin. DB, you want to stay on the mic and tell us about Eiyuden Chronicles? A lot of names that I don't understand how to pronounce today.
Eiyuden Chronicles 100
Eiyuden, okay.
Heroes. So this is another game that came out on Game Pass, came out on everything this week. It is, as I talked about a little bit last week, this is the kind of spiritual successor to Suikoden, and it is it was a Kickstarter game developed and kind of directed, designed by Maruyama, who led the Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. Suikoden kind of in that PlayStation 1 era, big RPG, JRPG with a lot of recruitable heroes. This is exactly what it talks about in terms of 100 heroes. It is also very much within that vein of a PlayStation 1 era RPG. Last week I said I probably wouldn't get a whole lot of time to sink into it. This is completely true. Only had maybe an hour or so into it, so not nearly kind of picking at the systems of it yet with recruitment, but it visually is similar to the most recent Star Ocean second story, where you're in kind of a 3D plane, but you are pixelated characters and moving around there. It is the music is enjoyable. It's charming and almost cozy in its commitment to kind of that PlayStation 1 era type of pacing and JRPG aspect. Like, it was easy to kind of put on at the end of a night once I stayed awake through the opening cutscenes and just kind of grind out a few levels and get a sense of the gameplay, which is turn-based combat as you move over an open world. From what I've seen and read, the story kind of, it leans into those tropes of kind of a larger empire that's trying to take control and the ragtag bunch of heroes that's pulling them together. I think the reviews around it certainly speak to one of the concerns that I had of the challenge with this many characters is how do you connect with all of them? And at the same time, I think I'm realizing like it doesn't necessarily matter if you find a few that you do connect with, that it allows for the potential of replayability if you want to try to build your party differently. But it is, if a JRPG, a turn-based JRPG that kind of feels it is not the modern design aspect of Final Fantasy Rebirth, that you're looking for something more in the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 kind of mindset. This certainly fits that. For me, I looked to see if it was on Game Pass Cloud because it feels like it would be an easy kind of pull it up on your phone and grind out a few levels. And at this point, I mean, it is on the cloud. It does not have touch controls yet. You need to connect a controller, but it's paced in such a way that it would work well within a cloud-based streaming aspect as well. So nothing huge to talk about it yet, but definitely it is one of those where it's going to go on my backlog of JRPGs that I feel like I know that I would enjoy. Whether or not I ever have time to commit to sinking it all in is a whole different conversation.
So I'm not familiar with the franchise. Can you help true me up on is this kind of Fire Emblem engages, maybe not without that level of tactics, or sorry, Fire Emblem. Is it more engage or is it more Three Houses? Because you mentioned the plethora of characters.
It is less of, well, I guess it is more engage in terms of that your characters just kind of sit alongside you. There's not. There might be a little bit of relationship building, bonds type of thing, but not like in the Fire Emblem, who are you going to ship and pair up in those types of ways. You get some dialogue depending on who's in your party. You'll get different dialogues as they kind of go through. Most of that is text. It is more so in the combos, like if you're pairing up different classes, that many of the different characters fall under different classes, and so being able to kind of balance your party and pair it up that way. So it's not going back into the Suikoden series from my memory of it, and this is you hung out with your college roommate who played a whole lot of this game, but you never actually played it yourself type of game experience, right? Like it is about party building more than it is relationship building.
And we're going to keep tabs on whether or not this turns out to be the year of the JRPG. It has been JRPG heavy this year. Unicorn Overlord, Eiyuden Chronicles, Final Fantasy Rebirth, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So I know you haven't played all that much, but do you know about how many characters you've gathered into your party so far? Or do they kind of feel samey? I don't know. Like I said, since you haven't played that much, I don't know if you've had a chance to see that.
No, I don't know that. I mean, only a handful, like beyond the 4 that you start with. I haven't gone too many more than that. So, okay. I think because of the turn-based aspects of it, I think looking at doing a little bit of digging in the menu for the sake of the conversation tonight, like as you level up some classes, you unlock abilities, which is par for the course within the genre. So, but at this early stage, you've got magic classes, you've got different weapons, brawlers, range and melee. But because it's turn-based, those things only make so much of a difference. It seems like as you're kind of spooling it up, that you'll get, different elemental abilities and depending on your characters, things like that. So no, I don't know that I can speak to it too much. I mean, I've listened to a number of podcasts and read about it as well, enough that I feel like there's a good amount of depth here. But at the same time, a lot of the reviews that have been talking about it and the dialogue around it is kind of not necessarily compromised, but it does what it's trying to do just fine, but what it's trying to do is not necessarily anything revolutionary. It is very much within the lineage of the late 90s, early 2000s type of game design.
Okay. Cool. All right, Game Logic. Tell us about your Borderlands 2 gaming. Oh, got a video.
Oh, we're watching some Borderlands 2. So really, I mean, I've played Borderlands 2 through multiple times. What brought you back? Are you playing it on a different setup? I mean, what kind of engaged you in Borderlands 2 at this stage in the game?
Well, I am playing on PC, which I have not played all of the I have not. I've done one full run of Borderlands OG on PC. I started playing that game on PlayStation. I don't know if I've played any of them on Xbox. But I started playing them on console. I don't think I've made a full run of Borderlands 2 on PC either. I played a good chunk of it with a co-creator of mine when I was on Twitch, who he and I used to do co-streams together. And we played through a good chunk of Borderlands 2, but I don't think I did a complete full run. So I did want to go back. The search started because I wanted to find a secondary PvP online multiplayer shooter to go along with Call of Duty, because I did hit a point where a couple of weeks before the start of season 3 on COD, between NVIDIA updating their drivers, Sledgehammer seeding stuff in the background, I just got some crept in instability, and Call of Duty was unplayable for a period of 2 weeks. And normally when that would happen, I would go play Halo Infinite, but I've just become less interested in playing Halo Infinite as the player base had drawn down. So I originally started to look for a secondary PvP shooter, and I wound up just getting a list of shooters, and I was planning on just bypassing that list, but I stopped to look at it, and I was like, oh, Borderlands. I've been meaning to get back and do another run of that on PC. So that's what kind of got me to this point. And then I decided I wanted to, do some Let's Plays of it just to put up on my channel. So that's what got me back to it. Having a great time with it. Obviously, there's a strong argument that the Borderlands franchise is, maybe arguably, some of the best, looter shooters that were out there. It's definitely one of the ones that I think, you hear me often talk about how, I don't get involved in any game that I can't walk away from in 30 seconds or less, evoking that line from Heat. And the Borderlands franchise is one that definitely gets through most of it until you get to Borderlands 3. Maybe things start to get a little icky. But for the most part, are just games that you can just play that don't get you bogged down with a bunch of baggage. We all loved Destiny 2 for our time, but Destiny 2 was a job. And this is a thing that you could just play that has, great shooting. I mentioned when I went back and did my Borderlands 1 run, how I originally wasn't like a super huge fan of cell shading, but I've noticed in these reruns, like cell shading is a graphical style that holds up over time. Like it looks the same now as it did 10 years ago, and that isn't any less palatable than it was. So Borderlands 2 obviously, made some changes and tweaks with the systems from Borderlands. Some of those are learned, in terms of muscle memory. So one of the things is I triage what weapons I pick up by cash value they represent, rather than, my default used to be to kind of look at damage. But
you got to sell them, right? You got to look at that value. Yep.
Well, less so selling them, but more so I feel like the cash value is a great aggregator that indicates across damage, range, and rate of fire that really tells you, right, what the it's kind of like the whole band multiple, of the weapon. But the cash value is very tiny, right, in the UI when you're looking at weapons on the ground. This one also has a thing, where, and I think they had it in the first one, where sometimes you auto pick up items, but then sometimes you don't. Sometimes, detecting exactly, when you open up like big ammo caches that have like 8 different ammo pieces in them, which ones you can pick up and can't. So some things are an improvement in terms of quality of life, some things aren't. But overall, it's a pretty fun game. One of the things that I really appreciate in the level design of Borderlands is, for most of the game, most of the areas are fairly open, and you, in less fashion than I think you do with some other shooters. One of the things I hate is when environments are sticky, and as you're going around trying to get hurt, you like get stuck on stuff, and you wind up taking a lot of damage. And you're like, what the heck am I stuck on? And that tends to not happen in Borderlands. There tend to be enough kind of open areas that you can get to, and still maneuver around. So it's particularly enjoyable. Yeah, so I'm having a good time with it. What's the guy's name? Handsome Jack. Maybe arguably one of the worst villains, right, that's been created in the last few years. As much as he tries to be humorous, he definitely has a lot of hate. Like, you get to the point where like hearing him in your ear is just as grating as some other villains that we hear who come off as much more like deliberately and directly malevolent. Like his sarcasm just like gets to the point where like, yeah, I'm looking forward to being this guy and giving him his comeuppance. So, but yeah, having a good time with it.
I think that's probably, as you're talking about the graphic style, right? Like, I think the graphic style definitely holds up. Even like modern systems really kind of clean it up, sharpen it up a little bit. That the writing is probably one of those where it's going to land differently. We're 12 years out at this point from some of it. And so, but again, it's a great pick up and play, as you said. Like, these are the games that I've played through with my sister-in-law, my uncle, people that are kind of casual gamers that can jump in and jump out without necessarily having to understand multiple microtransactions and, crafting abilities and things like that.
All right. So my first game up here tonight is Contractors Showdown, which is, I'm playing on the Quest 3 through my PC, so PCVR through Steam. There's a game I was playing a few months ago, basically kind of battle royal Warzone game in VR. And finally, really, I was just doing like the beta tests back a few months ago, a couple times. Now they finally released it this past week. So I got to play a couple days of it. I kind of had a busy weekend, so I haven't really had a chance to play too much of it this weekend at least. So I jumped back in. It's pretty much the same. They really haven't changed too much that I've noticed, other than a little bit of like your little starting area. You kind of jump in before you get into a game. Kind of like the shooting range and kind of where you can test your guns. They kind of changed that a little bit. But other than that, everything seems pretty much the same. But it's just a fun battle royale game to jump into, play a few games. You know, I was able to play a few games with some friends earlier, or late in the week last week. So that was pretty cool. I played a lot of random games. Surprisingly, I didn't get a win. At least I've gotten one win so far, unlike in Warzone, which I never ever had gotten a win in. Unfortunately, one of the few battle royale games that I never got a win in. But it's kind of nice that this one, you know, obviously it's VR, so it's a little bit more immersive, and you know, it feels really good. Graphics still a little weird, like when you're traversing the ground. It's not so much popping, but when you get into certain, especially like hilly areas, like the ground seems kind of flat, and then it kind of just like bubbles up, which is I've never seen. I don't think I've ever seen that in a video game before, VR or otherwise. So I don't know if that's something they just got to fix, or I mean, even if I like turn the graphics down, which it's not super graphic intensive, like it still does that. So I don't know if that's something with the game itself. But other than that, and it doesn't happen all the time, but just every once in a while. So it's just a little weird when you come upon those when that happens. But yeah, just having a great time with that game, and want to kind of keep continuing. There's no battle pass right now. There is a store where you can just buy like cosmetic stuff for like characters. There's 8 different characters you can choose from. Nothing like there's no special abilities or anything between the two. They're just skins, but you can buy you can buy other skins as well as unlock them through the in-game currency. But and actually, which is kind of nice in the store, you can either pay for like I forgot what their money is. There's 2 different ones that you can pay for, or that you can use. And both of them you can earn in game. So obviously, you know, like if you buy money, it's only like 10 or 20 like coins or whatever. Let's just call them. But then the other one is like, I think it's like respect points or something. It's like RP is the initials, and that's like 15,000 something. So you got to grind quite a bit for that in-game money. So but at least, you know, you can, you know, if I just save up, I'll be able to unlock stuff eventually. So it's kind of nice they let you do that. But I don't know. I haven't seen anything like if they're going to have a battle pass at all, but I'm assuming at some point they probably might. I mean, you know, it's just like all battle royale games, but I'll just have to see what happens in the future. But yeah, just having a good time with that, and going to continue to play that. So, GameLogic still chugging away at Modern Warfare 3. I see on the PC. Any news on that one? We got some more video too.
Yeah, just a video, just to while away the time. Nothing much in terms of like big news. You know, season 3 Reloaded will drop here on May 1st. There was some other like big drop that happened. Actually, it had almost convinced me that they had dropped Reloaded early. But there was some like huge patch that came through. But it wound up not being early. The map rotation now has gotten a little weird, because now they are. At first, I was like, oh, they're mixing in new maps, and again going back to, you know, but it's not Reloaded. They're not new maps. They are mixing in now I can't even remember what the LTM was called. They're mixing in like the Horde mode that they had for a while. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of season 3. We had this mode that was like this weird mixture, Horde Point. And so it was hard point, but they streamed in zombies in waves out of portals. And so you were playing for the hard point, but But the hard point was being rushed by both obviously the opposing team, but also zombies they were streaming in, and then at some point during the match they would also stream in like alpha zombies, really super powerful zombies. So some of the maps that they're mixing in the rotation now are the regular maps, but with their horde point, overlays on top of them, which either in some maps there are spore clouds on the map. In some maps, like Rust is now there's an alt map called Tetanus, which I guess just gives it some kind of overlay of like neon yellow lights for some reason. I don't really know what that has to do with zombies, but it is what it is. So probably the main thing that I've done to differentiate gameplay now for me, the gameplay experiences, I had never really paid attention to the ability this time to activate challenges on your own. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is like, why am I enjoying Modern Warfare so much? Why am I enjoying Call of Duty so much this time? And I'm like, I'm enjoying it so much because it's been the first year that there hasn't been that much change. Like every year, it's like a huge amount of churn to like re-onboard and refigure out weapons and figure out what they've changed. Did they change stuff this year? They changed kind of how weapons progression works a little bit. They've done minor tweaks. They've changed up stuff with your loadouts, because now instead of you having perks, you pick what type of gloves and what type of boots and what type of tack equipment you want to take, which feels a little more realistic. Again, Call of Duty is not a necessarily realistic game, so I'm not trying to say it's become a sim, but there are things that translate differently than you just picking, perks. So they have changed stuff, but because of the approach that they've done to it, I enjoy it because I feel like there's a lot less churn that I've had to go through than previous years. But one of the nice things they've done this year is you can go in and so say, so like the sniper rifle that I'm using, which I think this is the Imperium. But you can have, there's let's say there's a bunch of all your optical attachments. There's optical attachments that you will progress through as part of the natural progression. But then there are some that are labeled as armory unlocks. And so you unlock them when you complete like a certain number of challenges. So you're doing your challenges. One of your challenges is win matches. So I think you get some credit for that, partial credit, maybe not full, but you can tag them, and tag them as active. And then like when you earn like when you complete a certain number of challenges, then like that weapon attachment unlocks. And so they're weapon attachments that maybe everyone else doesn't have unlocked because they're not in their natural progression path. So you can kind of tune your progression path a little bit for any given weapon, or focus on like, I want to unlock like that particular silencer or that particular optic for that particular weapon. And I never really paid attention to that, or like, allowed myself to be bothered with it. But I have started doing that today because, again, I've been putting in a ton of time, and now I have some additional bandwidth cognitively to kind of think about things like that. And so yeah, that's the next thing that I've done in investing my time. So broke prestige level 300 today, so I'm at prestige 6, and yeah, continuing to chug along.
Wow. You prestige 6 times now? I think on Cold War I did maybe 2. I think that's probably the most I've ever done. I've ever prestige on any Call of Duty, even from back in the day, but it's pretty
impressive. I definitely go in there nowadays and I see some 500s and some 600s.
Wow.
And I'm just like, wow, you guys it's impressive. People putting in a lot of time.
Yeah. I actually jumped back in Cold War just for like a half a dozen. I didn't put it on the list, but just for like a half a dozen games or so this past week. And I don't know. I just had an itch for Call of Duty all of a sudden. Probably because I've seen you playing 3 so much these last few months. But it was nice just to kind of jump back in Call of Duty for a little while in Cold War and, get my Twitch skills back up before the new one drops this year, which hopefully will be pretty good since it's I was like Tencent, not Tencent. Well,
Treyarch.
Yeah. So yeah.
So
all right.
So just real quick, Warwana asked in the chat, what exactly is onboarding, which is a thing that we talk about frequently here. So I won't go into super detail. We'll do that another time. But onboarding is just basically when you getting you onto a new game or getting you onto, even if it's a game in a sequence or a series or a sequel, there's a greater complexity of things that happen to bring new gamers into the fold, or even, like I said, veteran gamers. That's more than just tutorials. There's really a science and a nuance to it. I mean, we refer to that as onboarding, and it's really an aggregation of the introduction to the story and the game's mechanics, and a little bit of the tutorials. Progression. There's a kind of a formulaic mix to it that we kind of talk about on the show pretty often. So we'll definitely expand on that topic later on another show when we have more time.
Well, and Josh hits it real quickly here too, of kind of getting you up to speed, right? It's, as you said, kind of integrating you into the systems and the gameplay and kind of what that gameplay loop is, whether that's heavy in gameplay or heavy in mechanics and kind of crafting and iterative loops there. So
Nice. All right. My last game for tonight is Red Faction Guerrilla ReMARStered Edition, which I think I mentioned last week that I did actually have on my Steam Deck. So I pulled that one down on my Steam Deck and I started playing that one. That one was the one because I had remembered I thought I had started. I had gotten pretty far within I think maybe the first level. Like it was almost, I shouldn't say first level, the first area where you're kind of unlocking different as you're doing the different missions, you like kind of unlock the area to make it more of the rebellion or resistance, whatever you want to call it. More, they're taking over that kind of that space. So that was the version I had done that in, and so I got up to pretty much up to speed from my previous just standard Red Faction Guerrilla gameplay I had done the weeks before. So on the second kind of area that it's a little bit bigger, so some more stuff to do. Pretty much the same stuff. I don't really see any difference in missions, at least not right now. Maybe as I don't remember because it's been a while since I beat the game back in the day. But if they vary more, because you can obviously you just follow the main path, follow the main story, you do different things, and then there's those kind of side quests you can do. Like most of them are just time quests, like destroying stuff, either by shooting or by using just a hammer, or any way necessary to destroy a building or whatnot. So, and then there's like almost like a horde mode version where you have to defend a certain area from all the EDF guys coming in, just stuff like that. So I'm just going through it and just having a good time. Once again, I just need something to kind of go crazy in. So I had downloaded that on my my Steam Deck. So good old ReMARStered version. It does look a lot better because since I was able to compare them this time because I had played the standard version. Character models are they still like pretty much the same, but definitely the vehicles and the environment, you can kind of see the difference in the graphic bump. So it's just kind of a neat thing that I was able to see comparatively, like right away since I'd played the old version. But still just having a lot of fun in that one. And mostly I'm just playing that one on my kind of my train ride into work when I have to go into the office. So it's kind of a nice thing to jump into for like an hour, a little under an hour that I have. So kind of a good, wacky fun. So
And both of you guys have. Do both of you guys have the OLED Steam Deck?
I do, yeah.
I do as well. Yep.
Okay. Yep.
All right, DB, you want to take us out with your NFL?
Sure. Yeah, as you're talking about kind of playing in between times things. But first, I want to do a quick self-correction from last week where I talked about Disney Speedstorm and the local multiplayer there still allowing you to play with all characters, not just the ones you have unlocked. That is no longer there. So I did a little bit of digging, and in the last season, the Frozen season from a few months ago, that was a quiet change that GameLoft did. So now when you play local multiplayer, as I did this weekend with my son who is home from college, that you can only play the characters that you've unlocked. So that is just a quick update and correction, which I also think really takes away from the kind of family friendliness that the game had for the first 9 months or so, even if you're not engaging with all those systems. And so, gentlemen, it's the NFL draft week. Which meant I was looking for a football game to play. and I did not find a football game to play, but I found a game called NFL 2K Playmakers. So this game is using the NFL 2K brand. It is by 2K. It is just released out of early access on mobile. And if you've ever, in the last 10 years, if you've ever played NBA 2K Supercard or WWE Supercard, this is pretty much it with football. I can't believe that they've had the non-simulation license for football for the NFL for the past few years, and it has taken this long to put a supercard game out. The graphics, the supercard games, historically, it's a game of war, right? Like of what card has a higher stat versus the other card. And here you've got cards for different skill positions, and that affects the percentage of if you're trying to do a different different routes and different plays, whether it's a run or a pass, and your defense kind of picking, guessing in Tecmo Bowl style if you're going to do a run or a pass, and that it is the graphics look like they've been there for 10 years. They are 3D models, but it runs really slow. If you could speed it up or skip over the actual, one of the things that was nice in the supercard games is that you could just like 4 times the speed and just kind of keep going through. It's not bad as like a little card battler, but it feels really, it feels like 10 years ago. There is no like progression system. There's no season aspect. Maybe it sounds like anybody that downloads it between now and May 7th gets a free character. And maybe then on May 7th, there's more of a launch. But this, I can see why they released it. I don't know that it's going to survive long enough to make it to the NFL season. So there is there's my NFL mobile game update. It feels very. I wish that 2K would grab the developers, the Saber developers for Wildcard Football, like you and I have played. GameLogic, like throw the NFL license onto that. Like take that game engine and turn it into Blitz and do something like that within the license. But
Or for EA to finally get around to bringing back the EA Sports Big label.
yeah, right. Like there's options there, and to the first thing out of the gate is a card battler that runs slower than any of their existing card, and they even just recently shut down their NBA card battler super card game for the first time in years. So yeah, it's granted it's disappointing, but I've still clocked a lot of hours into it because it's the in between game. It's the waiting in here and there. So we'll see, but it could have been much more than what it is.
So you don't control the actual action, right? You're just picking the cards and it kind of does it for you.
So I mean, you have cards as part of your team. You pick a play, like you're based on your cards and your stats on your card, they will give you a percentage of success. And so you have a run play that is 3 yards and it's 52% success. But if your opponent guesses a run blitz, it's negative 15% off of that. And then depending on your matchups, it could be it could be plus 10 for each character, minus 10 to 15, depending on how outclassed you are. So, and then even then, when you have 80 to 90% success rate, it's still chance. So there's been games playing where I've had a 90% to pick up a first down and still miss it because it's still a game of chance. So it reminds you to not get too heavily invested in it, which for a game that wants you to monetize is not necessarily the right recipe for financial success.
And you're playing AI or against people, or you can do both. If you
I don't think there's a head-to-head yet, technically. Like when you play head to head or when you play one mode, you're playing against other people's decks, but not necessarily like actively synchronously kind of choosing plays type of thing.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. So that is the end of the show. Let's end it with what we're playing next. Game Logic. It looks like you got a PC game that you're going to be jumping into or back into.
Yep, so I'm gonna pull some Warframe into the mix. They've got new content coming out now, although that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm gonna be playing the new content because I still to this day can never figure out the whole convoluted Byzantine Warframe lore. But I will make yet again another attempt to pull apart and pick at parts of it. But yeah, and still on my kind of shootery bend. Always love like the melee combat mixed in with Warframe. So. We'll be going back to check that out on PC.
Nice. DB, anything you're looking forward to?
I'm gonna give the new Onslaught mode in Destiny 2 a try. It's kind of a horde mode within Destiny 2, as you've been talking about games that we've rerun multiple times and Save the World. Makes me think I haven't tried that yet, so I'll probably give that a try.
All right, nice. And I'll probably stick with Contractor Showdown. Jump still into that this coming week. Thank you, everybody who stopped by in the comments. Metroid, Wana, Nelson Gaming, Here Down Under, Josh. I think I got everybody. But if not, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please check out the VOD on YouTube for any past shows, or if you want to rewatch this show, who knows. DBQ, Game Logic, thank you for joining me tonight. Next week I will be out again, but Game Logic will be the primary host, and DB, I believe, should be here. Maybe you guys can pull in Swiss. Maybe he'll want to jump in here. I think it's been a while since he's been on the show, but if not, you'll at least have Game Logic and DBQ Hams. Once again, thank you everybody in chat, and thank you everybody who's watching. Please, once again, check us out on YouTube. Do that comment and subscribe business, as we all like to say. Take care of each other out there. Play those games, and we will see you next week.